I'm breaking the show into two parts for today. First up is going to be one and done strategy. Then it's going to be the Sony Open research. Now you can just jump in the time codes because I'm good like that. I'll time code everything for you. If you don't care about the one and done, you can jump straight to Sony if you'd like. But I do want to remind you to play in the one and done for the year. $250 per entry, 5 max, and there are still 2 free entries I am giving away. And you can do that by going to fantasygolfchampionships.com, getting an entry, and then screenshotting me on Instagram, Twitter, email, wherever it might be, your entry already in, then you get a chance at a second one. But if you do want to try for a free entry, all you gotta do is sub to Mayo Media Network on YouTube. That gets you ballots. But the big thing you can do that gives you the most ballots in the draw is subscribe, rate, and review 5 stars the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast on Spotify and or Apple. You do it twice, you get double the amount of entries in the draw, and Jeff and I will be giving away those winners on the Monday show as we recap Kapalua and make our bets for the Sony Open. Additionally, I had Keith Stewart on the show on Friday. I tested out a new live show, so thank you all for tuning into that to test out a new format. I think I'm going to run it back again this Friday as I thought it was a lot of fun. We made some round 2 bets, but we did talk about strategy for the year. We talked in depth about stats, and Keith is just such a good hang. If you're not familiar with Keith, I highly recommend that you go back and listen to that portion of the show. Again, it's all time coded for you. It's up on the audio feed. It's out on the video feed right now as well. And Keith is just a cool hang. He's a wealth of intelligence and golf information, so I couldn't recommend following him more and listening to our conversation. He's going to be at TGL along with our buddy Joe Adone this week as well, and we try to talk through some bets that, listen, you might not want to watch the TGL. I don't know if I do or not. I mean, I will, but we'll see how that goes later on in the season. But I do think it could be somewhat exploitable in the betting market right away. If there's a spot where we can exploit and maybe get some plus money odds, maybe a 5-1, maybe a 2-1 in the first week, that's something I want to go into. So we go in depth a little bit more on that as well. So please, that was on Friday's show. Go check that out. All right, let's go.
Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
One and done strategy for 2025. This is the 5th year of the race for the Mayo Cup, and I want to thank all of you in the community who play in it every year, who tell people about it, because it's grown substantially, and we got to get this thing filled. It's 67% filled right now. There's 3,000 entries of the 4,500 that are taken so far. $250 per entry, fantasygolfchampionships.com. It's in the description if you want to go join it right now, which I suggest that you do. I always get pressure this time of year in order to make sure this filled. It's never not filled, and I do anticipate that it will fill again, but until I see that 4,500 number out of 4,500, I do have a lot of stress that goes along with it when there's $1 million guaranteed now in the prize pool and it has my name attached to it. You know, you get the benefits of when that fills and it's great notoriety, but it's a real bad look for you if it doesn't fill. So please help me out. Go get your entries as soon as possible. I expect it to be filled probably by Tuesday afternoon at the way that it's pacing right now. So if you haven't got in yet, I would suggest that you go do it right now. But I want to talk about some of the strategies that you need to do. Now, if you don't know what a one and done contest is, there's many different variations of this, but I'm going to be really hammering down on the giant contest that has $100,000 to first place, because I assume that's what you're here for. That's what you want to play in. And it's a lot like a DraftKings format where you're playing single entry against 20 people or 100 people, or playing a 150 max entry tournament against 450,000 people. There are different strategies that you can take. There's more margin for error in these smaller tournaments. You don't have to pick so many winners unless someone has an outlier year in the contest that you're in against 6 people or 10 people. It just goes absolutely bonkers the entire time. That's one thing. But against 4,500 people, there's a few things of note that you need to take in consideration. Now, last year was a little bit different. It was more of an outlier season, at least from what I've gleaned over the 5 years that we've done this, because you started the year off with all of these triple-digit odds winners that no one really had in the one and done. I think through 4 weeks last season, only 3 people out of the 4 weeks had actually hit a winner in the one and done. So wins were way down. No one in the one and done, the race for the Mayo Cup in 2024, had more than 5 winners on their team. So you had all the long shots, and some of them trickled out throughout the course of the year. And then Scotty won so many times, and you can only have Scotty once, that it was impossible to actually have anything in the events that he kept kept winning over and over. So if you were one of the people that used Scotty Scheffler in a week where he didn't win, you probably had no chance of actually winning the competition. And because the way the schedule works out now, my previous strategy of you got to hold these guys or you got to make sure that you use all your guys has to be tweaked just a little bit because there's such a discrepancy in the prize pools between the signature events, the majors, and the players, and the rest of the events throughout the course of the season. Now, as the rule works, what you have to do is you pick one golfer per week. When you pick that golfer, you can no longer use that golfer again for the duration of the season. There are 31 events in the 2025 race for the Mayo Cup. It starts at the Sony Open and goes through the BMW Championship. There's no alternate events or team event that is included in it, so you're going to get a bye week during the Zurich Classic. That's okay. You can take your foot off the gas pedal a little bit. And one of the great things about the race for the Mayo Cup is I hear over and over from, I've made the mistake before. I'm sure you've made the mistake before that you forget to make your pick for the week. Now, missing a pick missing a pick isn't the end of the world. Because honestly, if your guy doesn't win or come inside the top 5 of a tournament, it's basically like not making a pick anyway. That's how big the discrepancy is in some of these payouts. Now, if you come like 9th at a major, then yeah, it's going to be worthwhile, I suppose, to your time. But you need to be piling up top 3 finishes, basically, throughout the course of the entire season. For example, Wyndham Clark won Pebble Beach last year. Signature event, only 70 people, only the top players play in it. It's the same top players who play in those events over and over and over and over again. And he won $3.6 million for coming in first prize. Grayson Murray, RIP, won the Sony Open. Let's take an easier one. Let's take the American Express a year ago. Now, Nick Dunlap won that event. He was an amateur, so he got $0. That's worth noting for anyone who wants to use Luke Clanton this year. He is still an amateur at the beginning of the season, so regardless of how he finishes in a tournament, he's going to earn $0. So if he earns $0, you earn $0 for your team because all of the standings are predicated on you picking a golfer and the amount of money they win in that tournament. But the winner of the American Express ended up being Bezadenhout, who ended up coming in second, but he got $1.5 million. Third place at Pebble Beach in the signature event got $1.4 million. Sixth place at the American Express got $300K. Sixth place at Pebble Beach got $650K. So you want to save and make sure that you have the right amount of golfers for the signature events, the majors, and the Players' Championship, because those are $20 million to $25 million prize pools versus $8 to $9 million for the other one. So the room for error that if you come second, third, or first, you really get a huge advantage on the field, and you don't want to waste some of your really big golfers for some of the lesser events because you're going to want them for the bigger tournaments. So, for example, this season, at the American Express, we already have Cantlay, Scotty, Xander, Burns, Justin Thomas, all committed to that field. You probably don't, if you plan on using them at any of the signature events or any major or the Players' Championship, maybe you don't know that right now, but at least if you have an inkling to do that, you probably don't want to use those guys at the American Express. Because yeah, you win, you get $1.5 million. That's obviously really good, but you don't want to use Scotty there when you could have used him at the Players and he wins $5 million or something. Like the margins are so large between these large field tournaments and small field tournaments or small purse tournaments. And you have to remember that the signature events only have like 70 guys. There's no cut. There's cuts in 3 of them, but even so, they're not big cuts. So it's 156 people or 144 players versus 70. So the chances of finishing higher in those other tournaments are much wider as well. I'm not recommending that you go out and take the Nick Dunlap types, although he won a year ago. But if those tournaments are great to use the Brian Harmons and the Russell Henleys, at least earlier on in the season, because you're probably not going to use them in some of the signature events later on, but they're still way better than everyone else. You just don't want to be there with 6 tournaments left to go and you look at the list of the players that you have left and you have 12 elite guys who are ranked like top 20 in the world. You want to use your guys. I've done this tons of times as well. It's just like missing your picks. Missing your picks sucks, but at least at Fantasy Golf Championships, you can enter your phone number or email into the slot above and it will text you the night before if you haven't made your pick yet. It only takes 5 seconds to make a pick if you're really going to do it. So, you probably should sign up for that. That way you won't miss out on any of these picks. But you got to use all the good guys. Like the live guys are only available for 4 of the tournaments, all the majors. And do you even want to use them because everyone kind of piles onto them? I guess that depends on who you want to pick. Yes, you do need to play the ownership game somewhat. At least that's probably my first strategy tip to you is that A lot of times in these tournaments, just take a look at the top 5 guys on the odds board and try to figure out, and maybe even DraftKings ownership can help you out with this, is that who is going to be the least popular of those 5 guys? Like, when in doubt and you have tiebreakers, if you don't have a strong lean on someone for that tournament, it's probably the best way to go, because you're going to get a top 5 guy in the field, at least per the odds, which generally do correlate with how much of a chance they actually have to win, and you're going to get the one with the lowest ownership. So if that person wins, you have a huge advantage on the field, and you didn't burn anyone else who was at the very top of that field. That's just, general 101. Now, if you get to a tournament like, Hideki used to be this guy forever in Phoenix before the signature events and everything like that he'd be like 35% owned. He won it back-to-back years. He came 4th another year. Now, it was always the debate in the one and done. Do you just go with the chalk, burn it, and go along with the field with Hideki there and just hope he comes inside the top 5, or you just pivot against the field? And if he did come up short, he withdrew one of the years that everyone was on him in the one and done, that you just get such a huge leg up on everyone. That's how I like to play. Also, I've never won the one and done, and I rarely cash in the one and done. So maybe my advice on it isn't all that great. Maybe you should just say, hey, here's the guy I think is going to win, and hopefully you hit a whole bunch of winners or get a whole bunch of top 5s, top 3s as the year goes along. But it is worth noting that like coming in 42nd place is like missing the cut. That money doesn't mean anything. And that's why I've really changed a lot of my strategy over the years. And I've been doing better each year that we've gone on in this because I don't take any long shot guys anymore. Maybe that's a part of your repertoire and that's what you want to do. And it's a lot different if you're playing one entry versus the 5 max that you have. Maybe you do allocate a few picks on your team each week to someone longer in the field. But if there's only 31 events, what is the point of taking someone who's 380th in the world because you have a hunch that week? Like, that's kind of crazy. And that means that you'll have fewer opportunities to burn the really good players on top of that as well. And don't consider the fact as well that when we get to the end of the year, be it in the BMW Championship or the beginning of the FedEx Cup playoffs, there are players that weren't not even on your radar at the beginning of the season that will emerge as good players throughout the course of the year. Billy Horschel has won a FedEx Cup. Chris Kirk won a tournament in the FedEx Cup not in the recent past, in the distant past. But these are guys who just kind of heated up throughout the course of the season. And you're like, oh, geez, like these guys have elevated themselves into a position where they could be at the very top of these leaderboards. And maybe someone burned them earlier in the year, or you were waiting to use Victor Hovland or something like that for when he got better throughout the course of the year. And now you're in a spot where you don't even want to use him anymore. And you want to use one of these other guys who are just on the up and up with their recent form. So guys will emerge as the season goes along. So don't forget that either when you're really tinkering between, hey, do I want to use Russell Henley at the Sony Open, or do I want to use Ben Coles because no one's going to use him, and I'm going to save Russell Henley for later in the year. There's only so many guys you can use. You do have to prioritize making the most starts with the best players available to you. Obviously, you don't want to take the most popular guy every single week. You're not going to win against 4,500 people. Against like 10 people in a smaller one and dones, by all means, just take the chalkiest guy every single week or someone near the top of the leaderboard. I wouldn't even really worry about burning people, saving people. It doesn't really matter against that few of opponents. But against a lot of people, there's more strategy that ends up becoming involved. And you do need to pace yourself throughout the course of the year. I was in first place in this one and done at Bay Hill 2 years ago. I had John Rahm. Now, no one really used John Rahm. That's the year that he ended up winning the 4 times in the first 6 events of the season. He was Scotty Scheffler before there was Scotty Scheffler. And all we heard was John Rahm will never lose again. And then he started losing again, and then he ended up going to live, and you can't even use him at this point outside of the majors. But we were sitting Tambo and I were making the picks on the show, and we looked at it on the Friday afternoon. We were sitting in first place in the one, and I believe it was $70,000 that year. It's $100,000 to first this year. Everyone inside the top 12 gets at least 5 figures, which is massive in terms of payout, especially over the course of the entire season, obviously. And I think I finished barely in the money that year. So stuff can change very quickly if you are not hitting winners. If Scotty doesn't win 9 times this year on tour, I would anticipate that the winner will probably have in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 winners picked and probably a slew of top 5s to go along with it. That's the maximum upside. That's what you're trying to achieve in the one and done in order to have a chance by the time the end of the year ends up coming along. Like I said, miscuts don't really mean anything if the guy that you picked doesn't finish inside the top 3, 5, or to a lesser extent 10, depending on the tournament and the payout structure for those big money tournaments overall. But you can have off weeks. That's fine. You can be in first for the first 3 months of the season and not end up in the money. So keep that in mind. But if you are starting to trail at certain points of the season, usually post-Masters is when I start to think about this. That's when you might have to start swerving and taking a few more names off the board. And that's where ownership will really matter to you. It's not even just versus who the highest owned guy or the second highest owned guy is. In order to make up ground against so many opponents, you're going to have to get kind of wonky with your picks if you're still shooting to come in first place. No one's really out of this because 2 winners in a row will vault you to the very top, or at least into the top 50 of everyone overall. Like, that's just how the numbers are going to work out. You just have to figure out a way to get those guys. I mean, picking a winner on a regular week when we're all picking 10 guys, as you've probably seen from the betting cards, is hard enough. Using one guy when not everyone is available to you every single week is exceptionally difficult in order to pick a winner. So you have to be very thrifty with how you're going to go through everything throughout the course of the season. But if you get behind, you need to catch up and start taking a few more swings for the fences in that regard, just because if you're going to end up coming back, you can't have the same picks as everyone else. If you have the same picks as everyone else, you're just going to tread water with the entire field. You need to get different at some point of the year. But just because you're out of it, like in last place after 5 weeks, that really does not mean anything. Like, that's 1 week away from being inside the top 100. The later you get into the season, the bigger of a swing that you actually need to take. And I think my favorite thing about the one and done overall, and I've written this all up. It'll be in the newsletter post on Sunday evening. It's already an article on Twitter. I've started to publish a few more articles on Twitter, reminiscent of the stuff that's in the newsletter. The newsletter is free to join. You can find that in the description. But if you do see it on Twitter, it's underneath articles or it's pinned to my profile at the PME. Please retweet that and like it for me. I'm trying to establish more of a foothold over there, and I do need your help with that to game the Twitter algorithm a little bit to make sure that's engaging content for people. But the entire one and done strategy is written up over there. I think it's like 2,000 words. It's not a long read, but it kind of expands on some of the concepts that I've talked about today. And I would really appreciate if you would go do that for me. All right. So that was the one and done strategy. Please play in the race for the Mayo Cup at Fantasy Golf Championships this year. And if there's still time before Monday when you're watching this, get in those free draws, because who wouldn't want a free entry? Who free $250 entry to a one and done? All right. Coming up, the Sony Open research, field, stats, and complete preview. The TGL, presented by SoFi, is golf's newest league. It's all indoors in an arena with high-tech meeting. High stakes meets prime time on ESPN. It's the 3-on-3 match play golf league that takes the competition of pro golf and places it inside the arena atmosphere. 6 teams featuring the PGA Tour's best players go head-to-head every single week. And we're talking players that get mic'd up, shot clocks, refs, never-before-seen holes, a moving green, the playoffs, the lights, the camera, all of the action all goes down. The first-of-its-kind arena golf league in Florida. And yes, you can bet on the TGL, which is the greatest part about this entire thing. You can stream it live on ESPN. So, what you need to do is tune in Mondays and Tuesdays on ESPN in January, find out the right odds, get a feel for how this is going to work, and go win some money. Remember, it's only on ESPN and ESPN Plus. This is TGL presented by SoFi. Keep up is golf. Sony Open in Hawaii, the first full field tournament of the year that features a cut line. This is so much better than Kapalua. Although Kapalua is getting better in my mind because they've expanded the field, I find it far more of an interesting viewing experience. I'll have that recapped with Jeff on Monday, and as I'm recording this, round 3 hasn't concluded yet, so I do not know the results. And if you've been following my bets, I really don't know what's going to happen before this tournament. Hopefully, Harry Hall and Wyndham Clark can stay competitive here and give me a sweat on Sunday, but we'll see about that. This tournament played at Wailea Country Club, which you are seeing on the screen from the N64 version of this game. I don't know why they picked Wailea as a video game course, but they did in the mid-90s, featuring one of the most hilarious and gruesome commercials you've ever seen for a video game. I don't know how that was airing on Saturday mornings when I was watching that awesome Spider-Man show on Fox, but here we are. 144 players in the field, top 65 and ties make the cut. Begins a little bit later Eastern time, at least, because it's in Hawaii, on January 9th, and as I mentioned before, RIP Grayson Murray. The defending champion won in a playoff over Ben An and Keegan Bradley a year ago. By my count, there are 34 golfers in the field this week that are currently playing at Kapalua. For a very long time, there was a very strict rule that if you played at Kapalua, you were on the short list of players who would win at the Sony Open. That did get beat up a little bit last year when Grayson Murray ended up winning. And I believe the year before that, Siwoo won. I can't remember. No, he probably would have been in the field because I think he won the Amex the year before that. Anyway, there's a bunch of sponsors exemptions in this field. There's some good players in this field, but Luke Clinton, Aldrich Pottinger, and then four Japanese players, are all playing on sponsors exemption. If you're not familiar with them, Clinton has been one of the best amateurs to play on tour like this millennium. I know Dunlap got the win in American Express a year ago, but Clinton's been favored in tournaments as an amateur. He has 4 top 10s and 7 PGA Tour starts, which is pretty good. He's going to be one of the highest guys near the top of this field. If you did skip out on the one and done strategy, just a reminder, amateurs do not earn money for their finishes, which means if you take Luke Clinton this week in the one and done, you will earn $0 regardless of where he comes in. Pottinger is a 20-year-old South African, won on Corn Ferry last year, and actually had a great finish during the swing season on DP in December. Came top 10 in Australia and South Africa. He's also like 30 feet tall. He's a giant man, but 20 years old is pretty good. Yuta Sugiura won the Japan PGA Championship last year. He was T6 at the Zozo in October. Kensei Hirata is 112th in the official world golf rankings. He won 4 times on the Japanese tour last season. He played last year as a 22-year-old in Sony and ended up missing the cut. Mao Matsuyama, the great leap forward into the Sony Open. He's only 15 years old. Let's probably scratch him off the list. Takumi Kanata has played in 23 PGA Tour events, including the Sony Open. And he has never made a cut in any of those events, PGA events or majors that have had a cut line. So watch out for that. And Jesper Svensson, not Adam Svensson, Jesper Svensson, who qualified through the DP World Tour last season. He won in Singapore in March. He was T7 at the DP World Tour Championship in November, is making his start here. So those are some names that you may not recognize in the field this week. In terms of the course itself, it's a par 70, YLICC, 7,044 yards, 11.5 on the stimp meter, Bermuda green, 7,100 square foot. Greens, number of bunkers, 83. Number of holes with water in play are 5. There are 4 par 3s on the course. Pretty difficult holes, average around 192 yards. 6 holes on the course are parred at least 69% of the time, and all 4 of the par 3s are included in that range. And 7 holes have a bogey rate north of 16%, and 3 of them are par 3s. 12 par 4s on the course. Because this is a par 70, the average length is 435 yards, so not overly long, but holes 1, 2, and 6, all par 4s, are 3 of the 4 most difficult holes on this layout, all posting a double or worse rate of 2% or higher. 5 holes have a bogey rate north of 18% on this course, and 4 of them are within the first 6 holes on the front 9. The par 5s are some of the easiest. They close both 9s, holes 9 and 18, 529, some of the shortest second shots going into it of any course on tour. Everyone in the field can get there into. The average distance on your second shot coming into both of these par 5s is 223 yards. Hole number 9 carries an eagle rate of almost 7%, which is more than the bogey rate of 3%. So keep that in mind. If your guys are not making birdie on both of the par 5s, they are likely losing ground in the field. And when you're sweating the cut line, come Friday afternoon, or Friday very late, I suppose, on the East Coast for the Sony Open. Just a reminder that guys are going to birdie 9 and 18, so keep that in mind. Taking a look at the scorecard beforehand in terms of DraftKings showdown streaks, if you're trying to game out a little bit of an edge, holes 1 and 2, as mentioned, are super difficult. So if you do want to split, because guys are going to go off on 10, guys are going to go off on 1. If you are faced with a decision, a coin flip between 2 players, it is more likely to build a birdie streak starting from hole 1 than it is at 18, or than it is at number 9, because 18, well, easy, rolls into 1 and 2, which are just not super easy birdie holes, whereas hole 8 plays easier than hole 17, and hole 10 plays easier than hole 1, so you can get a bit of a wrap around that way if you're looking for any extra sort of edge. Taking a look at the past champions in this field. Grayson Murray won last year, as mentioned, minus 17 in a playoff over Keegan Bradley and Ben An. He was 400 to 1 to win the event. The year previous, Siwoo won by a shot over Hayden Buckley at minus 18. He was 40 to 1. Hideki won at minus 23, killing all of our just fantastic Russell Henley bets in that playoff. That was at minus 23. Hideki was 18 to 1. Kevin Na won the year before that at minus 21. A shot over Chris Kirk that he was at 60 to 1. Then Cam Smith in an outlier Sony Open, which featured really bad weather. He finished at minus 11. He won in a playoff over Brendan Steele. Cam Smith was 40 to 1 to win that year. Few more notes if we're looking at the first round from last year. The first round leader was Cam Davis, who fired an opening round 62. Cam Davis has had a lot of success at some of these shorter events, and we get into it in a little bit once we really jump on and dig into Fantasy National. We're going to try to correlate some courses together, which a lot of people know. I consider this a part of the Pete Dye swing, despite it not being a Pete Dye course. It's like the short course swing. You have this course, you have Waialae, you have Bermuda is a new one to add to that list, as we've seen some crossover there, especially from the back end of this field. Colonial, Harbour Town, and Wyndham Championship would be the main ones to all put together to see both in terms of field strength, not so much with Harbour Town anymore, with it being a signature event, but historically, and the other ones all play a bit on the shorter side and feature very similar fields. So you might get a little bit of long shot winners from this event. As we kind of went back and looked at with the overall outright winning odds, Hideki was 18 to 1. That's by far the shortest in terms of the odds board that we've seen win at the Sony Open. Before that, I think the last favorite to win would have been Justin Thomas when he became the second player ever to win both the Century and Sony in the same year. He opened with a 59 that year and was just uncatchable the rest of the week. But last year it was Cam Davis, fired a 62 to open. Taylor Montgomery fired a 64. Eckroat and Jaeger and Aaron Rye and Webb Simpson all fired a 65. And if you take a look at the final leaderboard, you don't see a whole lot of those names inside the top 10. So anyone can kind of come back. One bad round is not going to sink you here, even though we've seen winning scores inside, and Hideki winning at minus 23 is a pretty low score overall, but minus 17, minus 18, minus 21, minus 23, 62s are available, so you can shoot 8 under, and have one bad round. Hopefully, that's not where it's going to come out, but that's what we can see. Switching over to fantasynational.com, you can get all the information you need, and we're going to build this out a little bit in terms of modeling. I've had that done coming into this show as well. I like to prepare just a little bit before I really dig in for everything else. But fantasynational.com/Mayo will get you a 20% off discount, and now's the time of year. You get that annual, you get 20% off, you get every tournament, you get all the stats, you get all the tools. And speaking of the one and done, there is a one and done planner at the very top of the screen, if you scroll over a little bit, which will show you at least the guys that have verbally committed or officially committed to some of these tournaments. We've been seeing a few more names get updated to the Farmers field as we go through. There's Farmers. Jason Day is going to be playing in the Farmers. Who else is playing in the Farmers this year that is committed? Not a lot of commitments so far into the Farmers Insurance Open at Torrey Pines, but that was really key when we were talking about best ball. And just a reminder for everyone out there that there's going to be another best ball tournament, potentially, and maybe even a custom one for the Pat Mayo Experience audience, that if you use code Mayo at Underdog right now, you'll get your deposit bonus of up to $1,000. You'll get a free pick in the pick'em game. But if we get, I believe it's like 50 more people to use code Mayo, they're going to give us a custom best ball PGA draft with a lot of money guaranteed into that tournament, starting at the Waste Management. So this is where this key planner will come back in. So please go use code Mayo. Shane Lowry is committed to the Farmers. Hideki is committed to the Farmers. Hideki's looking like a very good pick early on in best ball because he's playing both Sony and Farmers as a part of round one. Molinari will be there. Morikawa has now committed to the Farmers. Pavon will probably play there again because he is the defending champion. Let's see, Justin Rose is going to play, so he's going to skip out on the Dubai tournament that's happening in that same week. So that's at the season-long planner. If you play in season-long leagues or anything like that, you can find that at the top of the Fantasy National site, fantasynational.com/Mayo. Tournament-wise, if we take a look at the past results from this tournament, you can see Russell Henley he won it, I think, in 2010. That's how long Russell Henley has been on tour. Top 4 finishes 2 of the past 3 years. Hideki has that 1 win in 2022, but no other top 10s to go around it. Kirk has 2 top 3 finishes in 2 of the past 4 years. Nick Taylor hasn't finished worse than T11 any of the past 4 years that he's played. You can see Cam Davis, last year's first round leader, has the 1 T9 in 2020 and then nothing inside the top 25, despite being that first round leader, but a guy that continuously plays this event. Connors has actually putted really well at this tournament over the years, but the rest of his game has never really shown up, although he has 3 top 12 finishes in his past 4 starts. So overall, it is pretty sticky, some of the guys that you see here. But overall, the field changes so much year to year that's tough to get too much of any sort of grasp on the situation. You can see it is a putting fest. If you're not gaining strokes putting, Chris Kirk, the only guy who lost strokes inside the top 25 finishers on the greens, and he lost a ton. Chris Kirk has played this tournament exceptionally well over the years. I believe I actually bet him coming off his win at the Century a year ago and did not realize that he would chip and putt himself out of this tournament, but overall it was very good. Grayson led tee to green, I believe. So you can see tee to green was the thing that really played itself out well. You had Grayson, Ben Ann, Carl Wan. So everyone who finished inside the top 5 on the leaderboard were 5 of the top 6 players tee to green. The only one who didn't was obviously the guy that I bet on, Chris Kirk, who finished tied for second with Ben Ann, but again, chipped and putted himself out of that tournament. Other guys, I forgot Hatton played in this tournament a year ago before he went to live. KH Lee, Taylor Montgomery. So a lot of accuracy-based players, and that's what we're looking at for this tournament. We take a look at the breakdown of how everything goes here. You can see the driving accuracy is not super high, and it doesn't need to be super high. You can play out of the rough here. This isn't a USGA setup. Of course, it's not the US Open, so that's not happening. It's like 2 inches to 2.5 inches. The greens run pretty slow, 11.5 on the stimp meter. That's average to slightly below average. It was 11 on the stimp meter at the Century. The greens are only 7,100 yards, as I mentioned, so they're a little bit lower. So you can see the driving accuracy is really low. However, the green regulation percentage is still 67%, which is higher than PGA Tour average. And the scrambling percentage is still pretty easy here as well, and fewer 3 putts per round than you would normally see at an average event. So, and driving distance is a little bit up as well. So just go bombs away. As long as you miss into the rough on the proper side off the fairway, then you're going to be doing fine in that respect. You can still get to everything in 2 and hit a lot of greens in regulation, which means that good drives gained for me is going to be more important than any of the other stats that we're looking at. So when we bring up the model for this week, you can see I have Sony Open loaded in already. You can always save your models and customize them all at fantasynational.com/Mayo to get that discount. You can see I have all of the ones in here. I've gone through and tweaked this one already, so we don't need to do that on the show, but I can show you what mine looks like right now. Approach 20%, par 4s 10%, par 4s 400 to 450 yards, where a lot of the holes are going to end up this week. You can see that 400 to 450 has 5 par 4s, and then 450 to 500 has 5 as well. I wouldn't worry. Generally speaking, you don't worry too much about the weather or wind at the Sony Open, although in the forecast, it does look a lot windier than it normally does with scattered rain showers throughout the course of the week, but obviously we're still 4 days before the tournament starts. We should keep up to that. I'll have that link in the Sunday evening newsletter with all of the information about the course as well, along with the key stat power rankings. And then they'll get updated again on Fantasy National after the conclusion of the Century finishes. Opportunities gained 15%. Eagles gained 5%. Off the tee 5. So I did throw that in there. Good drives I have at 10%. I'm going to boost that one up a little bit and lower off the tee because those two are similar stats. Par 5s 5%. Par 3s 175 to 200, where 3 of them fall, is 5%. Putting 5 to 10, 10 to 15 feet are going to be in there as well. And then proximity 100 to 125. I only throw that in because when you see the average shot distribution, that there's just almost 20% of the shots come from that range. The plurality come from 150 to 200, and then you have obviously the par 5s and two of the par 3s, that are 200 plus, but I'm more concerned about the scoring range of these and really generating those birdie opportunities and making the putt. So I have this the past 100 rounds in here right now. And you might want to shrink it down a little bit, and we will shrink it down a little bit before we look at the corollary courses. But to give you a longer-term view of what I have weighted that makes more sense, so the historic baseline over the past 2 years, really, of these events that we're looking at, Corey Connors is the number 1 player in the field, followed by Lucas Glover, Russell Henley, Matsuyama, and Tom Hoge. After that, it's the Gim Reaper, my guy, Davis Thompson, Spawn, Eckroat, Straka, Keith Mitchell, 4chan Kim, Clanton, despite only having played 30 rounds of overall golf in that period, Bezadenhout, Harmon, Kitayama, good at coastal courses, Kitayama, and is playing for to get himself back into the signature events as well. Ben Martin, Ryo Hisatune, Ben Griffin, Tom Kim, Justin Lauer, Daniel Hauserberger, Pendrith, Joel Damon, Kirk, Novak, Ryder, and JT Poston. Now, we can shrink that sample size down a lot if you want and take a look at. It's difficult at this time of year because so many stats are either drawn from events in the swing season. Some of the swing season events don't even have good stats to play around with. So some of these stats for people like Hideki are going to go back into last summer if we use past 24 rounds. So just keep that in mind as we're going through it. That's why I wanted to do the past 100 to kick things off, to look at a better baseline for some of the stats for these people. So you see, because you're going to see huge discrepancies. For example, Ben An over the past 24 rounds ranks 109th in this field. If we take a look at those rounds, he doesn't have weighted rounds since the Tour Championship on the PGA Tour. Of note, he did win in Korea during the swing season on the Korean Tour, but those stats are not factored into the modeling that I'm using. So we had 3 full playoff events. Those are 12 of the rounds. The Open Championship, the US Open. So you had 3 majors, a signature event, and the Scottish, along with 3 playoff events for Ben An. These stats will be more relevant for the players that played during the swing season when we're looking it over. You could even shrink it down to past 12 rounds to get a better sample of that as well. So just keep that in mind when you're searching through the stats earlier on in the season, that you probably do want to take a baseline of everything. And you can even use a mixed condition model for that. So let's try to do that right now. We're going to take, we could, you know what? We can just use the rolling model for that. I'll get to that in a second. Clanton's number 1 over the past 24 rounds. Glover, Kitayama, Matt Kuchar, JJ Spawn. I want to take a look at Kitayama. I know Glover had been playing well throughout the course of the swing, and so had JJ Spawn for sure. Henley, Pendrith, Gim, Ben Griffin, Joe Highsmith. My dude loves making short putts. So you can see with Highsmith, especially over the course of the swing season, he was pretty good. He was really good on par 4, elite on par 4s, elite on par 5s, and elite on good drives gained. Was top 10 in the field over that range, putting 5 to 10, and his proximity to his wedge game from in close is pretty good as well. So you can see that although his off the tee game was not very strong, his good drives gained based off his driving and irons in easier events like this where you can hit out of the rough was actually pretty high. So that discrepancy looks good for me with someone like Joe Highsmith, who I did like and have been betting like top 20s overall. You can see Joe Highsmith was the top 20 machine in the swing season, 11th, 5th, 16th, and 6th. So top 20s in 5 of his 6 starts during the swing season. Pay no attention to the RSM stats. We're having a dispute with ShotLink over however that they've been giving us the stats. So they're just off for this one. Moops is looking into it. He's been looking into it for 3 months. ShotLink will not update that. We're going to have to go customize that ourselves. Just keep that in mind that something might be askew with the RSM Classic. But you can see with Kitayama, he showed up a little bit towards the end of the season in Vegas, which is now off the schedule, which is the big bummer. Hometown event for Kurt Kitayama. Plays a lot out of TPC Summerlin in Vegas for the Shriners. That's no longer on the schedule, but gained a ton on approach in Utah, gained a ton on approach at the Shriners. There's no information from the Zozo from Japan, but finished top 5 in that field as well. The putting hasn't come along with it, but it's interesting to see with him that I do like him this week, despite never really having played all that well at the Sony. I think he's going to be out of sight, out of mind, and lower down on the betting board than a lot of players. But those are the players overall who have done very well. Harry Hall, at least through 2.5 rounds at Kapalua, is doing very well, but you'll see like Dietrich is in this field and doing pretty well, so his stats will update after the conclusion of the Century. Mad McNeely, who's also at least currently competing at Kapalua, is another one that you can look at who will probably be boosted up when we guess the odds, depending on how they end up finishing. Look, if Mav ends up flaming out in the final round and comes like T30th, then obviously he's not going to be 25-1 on the odds boards at the Sony. If he comes T3, then he's going to be like 18-1. It's funny how so much recency bias can play in, but that's really the only tournament of the new year that we have in our minds and have for data. And at least they played 4 competitive rounds. That is a huge advantage to all of these guys who are going into this field very cold. Maybe they played in Australia, like Pottinger, like I mentioned before, during December, maybe in South Africa, like Mac Hughes did and Corey Connors did. But outside of that, the most recent that most of these guys have played a competitive round is probably the end of November. And even before that, you have some guys in PGA Tour events that have not done anything since like September. So keep that in mind when you're trying to parse through a lot of this data. I mentioned I was going to get to the rolling report, so that's what I'm going to take on right now. You can also find it when you open up this scroll down, it'll be a part of the rolling model, and I'm going to use my Sony Open model for this, so we can get a sense of guys who have gained and who have lost over the course, and maybe some baseline players that we weren't considering. So it's all the stats that I just put in and all of the power rankings that I just have separated from 4 to the last 100 rounds. We've already done the last 100 rounds and looked at that, so let's take a look at the last 50 to see if there's any huge discrepancies. So you can see that Clanton moved up from 13th because he only has 30 rounds of actual coverage, from 13th to 4th. I like Clanton this week. I like Thorbjornsen this week as well. McClure Messenger is another one who went from 53rd to 10th and is playing in this field. We take a look at how he did during the course of the swing season. It wasn't great, but a lot of that was putting and chipping induced. If he can continue this very good iron play, he's at least going to score a lot of DraftKings points. Whether or not he can close the deal, this I do not know. I don't think that he played in the Sony last year. He did not. Let's see how he did in Bermuda. He didn't play in Bermuda either. And those would be the 2 most recent events that I'd want to look at for course history for a lot of these. Ben Griffin is someone who played in that event. You can see he went from 19th to 5th overall, the shorter we get. So Ben Griffin has been playing some terrific golf. Obviously, he was very popular in the best ball underdog game. Ditto with Eric Cole. You can see in Bermuda, he was T8. And I can guarantee you he did not gain 17 strokes off the tee in the RSM. So let's throw that one out a little bit. Campos was the winner of that event, but Novak, Hubbard, Ryder, Lauer, Griffin. These are all names that I would be considering. And my main man, Michael Kim. If you missed my Michael Kim interview from December, he talks about this tournament and the cut line. It was really fascinating to get some insight into the mind of Michael Kim, who is a PGA Tour grinder. I'm going to bet him to win this week just because I love Michael Kim. And listen, he's had some success at these tournaments. He made a club change. So all things to keep in mind with Michael Kim as we're looking for. But Ben Griffin, Vince Whaley is another one who's in this field. Just guys to consider who've played well. This event has shown a little bit of crossover. Crazy Carl Wan was the one last year who I ended up on, who I actually liked quite a ton. A year ago, he came in 5th. He couldn't quite get it done, but he popped at that tournament as well. McClure Messenger is up there for the last, I just mentioned McClure Messenger, so let's see some of the other guys that have fallen off. So Seb Straka has fallen off pretty well from the past 100 to more recent times. Damon remains about equal. Keith Mitchell has fallen off in a big way. Keith Mitchell's swing season went off the rails when he should have won. Where the hell was it when he should have won? I believe it was at Sanderson Farms. He had a good week in Napa, goes to Sanderson Farms, couldn't close on Sunday, and then his swing went off the rails. Miscut. So hopefully the break afforded him a little bit of a reset, at least mentally, to get himself back in. It was just kind of devastating. And that was the year for Keith Mitchell. Like, he had a lot of close calls and just played himself out of it on Sunday, which, for a guy who's won a tournament before and has had some success at Sony, T7, T14, T16 over the course of his career, has putted somewhat, he's either putted really well or really poorly at this event, that he's someone that I would have considered, but I think that he always just gets this artificial prop up in the betting market. Kitayama actually does really well from 100 all the way down. If we take a look at guys that have fallen off, so we got like past 12. Nico Echeverria has played himself up into the very top end over the past 12 rounds. A lot of guys that have played well during the swing season. Mac Hughes is another one. We'll see how Mac Hughes has done at this tournament over the course of his career. Ended very strongly, 3 top 10s in his 4 final starts during the swing season, then went over to South Africa and turned at a T6 at the Nedbank as well. If you were wondering what he had been up to at the Sony Open in the past, let's see, 1 top 20 in 6 starts for Mackenzie Hughes in that tournament, but his putter is en fuego at the moment. It has been for about 6 months. I know that's actually even more than that. Basically since Valspar and his T3 last year, he has been crazy good with his putter, which is not shocking for him, but if you can get it to mesh with approach play or even his chipping play, maybe it's not so much here where you want it. All the conditions play a little bit gustier and there's a little bit of rain in the forecast and you don't get lift, clean, and replace, then maybe there is something to look at with Mackenzie Hughes. But he's not generally one of my favorites in a tournament like this because his iron play can be so sporadic. Someone like Eric Cole actually makes a ton of sense in the world. Eventually, he's going to get a win on the PGA Tour, right? And he's not coming in after having a great century at Kapalua, at least as of right now, that maybe he'll be off the radar a little bit. But you can see a lot of the events where we're really looking into where there is crossover. Wyndham Championship basically being at the very top of that list, played really well there. PGA National, obviously he's lost in a playoff to Chris Kirk, who's had a lot of success here as well. Henley has won both those tournaments in the past. It's just statistically, it's hard to look at PGA National overall because there's so much water on that course and it really does affect some placements, some stats where you can just have a big negative out of nowhere. But typically speaking, the tournaments where he does his best work are the shorter tournaments. Was T13 at the Sony Open a year ago. Pebble Beach is another one you could potentially look at. He was T14 there in the 3-round event, although it was a signature event in 2024. So let's jump back and refresh the page at Fantasy National, and I want to take a look at, we're going to take a look at past 36 rounds. We're going to go 2024, 2023, and 2022. And we're going to switch back over to just strokes gained overall because it'll give us a better idea. Because for Bermuda, when we take a look at crossover courses, the only strokes gained data we have from that is strokes gained total. So you're not going to have approach or around the green from those. We'll go to the course finder and we're going to throw in the comp courses. So we have, that was by tournament. So Sedgefield for the Wyndham Championship is going to be one of them. And then we're going to go to Harbour Town. And then we're going to go to Colonial. And we're going to use those three. Now, obviously, Mayakoba was going to be the big one for this tournament, but Mayakoba is no longer on the PGA Tour. It is on LIV. But if you want to historically go back and look at the type of players that do well at those tournaments, that's where I would start. Patton Kizzire and Matt Kuchar won both of those events in succession. Mayakoba in the fall, and then Sony in the wintertime as the second event in January in 2018 and 19 or 17 and 18, whatever the 2 years were. I remember I hit Matt Kuchar on both those tournaments. So that was back when I used to pick winners. So looking at this, so we have Colonial, Harbour Town, and Sedgefield past 3 years, past 36 rounds. We're going to go to average, strokes gained total, and you can see who the best players are. It's Luke Clanton and McClure Messenger, 4 rounds, 8 rounds, and this is only taking the past 3 years of data. After that, it's still Kuchar. Bridgman is up there in terms of strokes gained total, albeit only in 4 rounds. Tom Kim has played these types of courses really well. Rio Hisatune in only 6 rounds. A lot of that predicated on his excellent result at the Wyndham Championship to end last season. Rico Hey in only 4 rounds, but you can see the total rounds do make a bit of an impact here. Overall, guys that have played those courses really well: Seabez, Russell Henley, Austin Eckroat, Davis Riley, who won at Colonial, but even as a part of his other rounds have done well. Michael Kim only has 6 rounds combined at these types of courses, but has played them really well too. Keegan Bradley, Patrick Rogers, Billy Horschel, Connors, Berger. We'll see where Berger ends up opening in the odds. If he's in like the 60s, I'm betting Berger. Hopefully it's beyond that. Poston, there's the Cam Davis shutout. Lipsky is a really interesting one too. I was on Lipsky here 2 years ago. Him and Ben Taylor, I just vividly remember being on. And he came at 4th at the Sony Open. He's miscut, 4th, and miscut. But the thing about Lipsky is he's playing some pretty good golf coming in. The crossover event at Bermuda, he was top 10. In Mexico this year at El Cardinal, not Mayakoba, was T6. He was second at the pro course of 3 top 10 finishes for the Lipper during the course of the swing season. He's played himself back into this event. He's a player that no one is going to be on in this event, but you can see for a player who's going to be ranked probably 150 to 1, 200 to 1, be $6,400 on DraftKings, that he's had success at a lot of the crossover courses that we've seen in these tournaments. Harmon, Davis Thompson, Silverman, Thigala is playing in this tournament, although this doesn't seem like a great Thigala course. You never know. He can always just get so hot with his putter that he can put himself into contention attention at this tournament. Beyond that, Svensson, Carson Young, two of my favorites have played this one really well. So that's what we're seeing. Tee to green wise, as we saw how important that was a year ago, you see that Russell Henley jumps up a lot, and this is a strokes gained model. So this is the one that I just typically use as a default setting, and it just kind of weights everything overall, but approach around the green. You can just see it on the screen right now. Then tee to green at 12%. So putting and approach being the most, but then re-adding in tee to green overall will give extra emphasis to approach in that format. It's more of a balanced way to look at it. So if we just look at the modeling over these three courses over the last 3 years and the strength and the power rankings, Henley, Seabez, Rogers, Riley, and Lipsky end up coming in at T5, which is really interesting. Tom Kim, Cam Davis, Matt Kuchar, Ben Griffin, Brian Harman. Hideki is going to open as the favorite in this field, and justifiably he should. He just doesn't happen to play that many of these events. After that, it's Herman, Post, and Connors. The Todd father, McClure Messenger, he's better than Pearson Cootie. He's the new guy who sounds like he's got a real rich daddy. Keegan Bradley, Eckroat, Hubba Hubbard, Berger, Horschel, Clanton, Svensson, Lee Hodges is up there. So a lot of the same names that keep coming up time over time is where you probably want to invest in, be it for betting, for one and done, for DraftKings purposes, that the top end names in this field, like the really elite players, don't typically end up winning this tournament. We saw that on the odds boards as well. Now, the other thing that I want to do over this period of time is add in a few more of those courses. So Port Royal would be another one. So Port Royal, that's the Bermuda tournament. We're going to throw that one into the mix. We're going to throw PGA National into the mix, the championship course. We'll throw in those. I don't know why they're listed as two, but they are. So throw them both in, and that's probably going to be good enough. You could throw Sawgrass into this. Hell, we can throw Waialae into it just to have some course history at this event too, and we can apply course filters to that. And we're continuing to look from the past 3 years to see how this has changed at all. So we're going to take an average, and we're going to go by strokes gained total because we have Bermuda in here now that doesn't have any of the tee to green type numbers or the putting numbers, but it would have total. So guys that continue to pop up, you see Campos gets a huge boost up, presumably because he won in Bermuda and only has 8 rounds of data to go through. And 4 of those rounds come from a tournament that he won. So obviously he's going to get a boost up. But it's Clanton, Henley, Hideki. Now we see Hideki boost up in terms of total and only 12 rounds at these courses over the past 3 years. So he doesn't typically play anything besides Sony. Campos, I'll figure. McClure. We'll just go with Troy McClure is doing all right here. Bridgman, Kuchar, Rogers, Pendrith, Ben Ann, Keegan Bradley. So 2 guys who lost in a playoff a year ago. Austin Eckroat, Seamus Power boosts up the list. Ben Silverman, the Canadian, starts to get another bit of a look as atypical names that we've seen from some of the other stuff. Straka gets a little bit of a boost. Connor's there. Andrew Novak, Novak Nation. Lipsky continues to be up there even when we add in these extra tournaments. And power ranking wise, when we take the key stats, which will take everything besides outside of strokes gained total from Bermuda, Henley, Kirk, Connor, Straka, Eckroat. Frankly, it's just a lot of guys that play really well at PGA National and have played well here as well. So that's what I'm looking at. You can dig in all you want at fantasynational.com/Mayo to get that discount and customize these stats any way that you like. Now, it is time for everyone's favorite segment, Guess the Odds for the Sony Open. And again, I'm doing this before the conclusion of Kapalua, and the final Kapalua leaderboard is really going to affect how big of favorites anyone is going to be. So Hideki is currently winning the Century as I'm doing this recording. If he wins, his odds are going to be shorter than if he flames out on Sunday. So keep that in mind. Give me some grace on this one, all right? No one's actually going to bet the fake odds that I'm making. I don't know why I feel like I have to preface this every single time, but there's like 3 people out there who are like, I can't believe you would think that it is this. And I don't like those people, so fuck you, all right? Sorry about that. Well, not sorry to those people. Sorry for the people who are like good listeners and good viewers who give good engagement, like the episode, sub to the channel, use code Mayo at Underdog, all that fun stuff. Just those other people piss me off. I'm trying my best here, all right? I only have so much information to work with. I have it separated into 3 tiers at the top. Hideki is on a tier of his own. I think he's going to be the overwhelming favorite in this field, and I have him at 9-1 right now. Now, again, if he wins, it could be shorter. If he loses, he could be like 13-1 or something like that. But I think, 9-1, 10-1 is where we'll see him. Then there's 3 guys In the next tier, Sahith Theegala, Corey Connors, and Tom Kim making their season debuts. I have a feeling they'll be anywhere between 14 and 22 to 1 on the board. I don't know which order they'll be in, but here we are. Tom Kim did not play in the Century, so keep that in mind. Then we have a huge tier of next guys. There's like 13 of them, and they'll be anywhere between 20 and 50 to 1, depending on the book that you go to, and then those odds will get swapped. If the guys that are like 45 to 1 will get bet down to 30 very quickly, but that range of player includes Keegan, Ben Ann, JT Poston, Luke Clanton, Mav McNeely, Eric Cole, Brian Harmon, former champion Kim, Russell Henley, Billy Horschel, Davis Thompson, Thomas Dietrich, and Robert McIntyre, who has shown a propensity to play really well on par 70 courses and courses with slow greens. Keep that in mind because he's not having an amazing... He actually had a really good second round at the Century, but I don't think he's going to be on the tip of anyone's tongue. He is skipping the Euro team event this week over in Abu Dhabi to play in the Sony Open. I think I'm going to like Bobby Mack. Hopefully he can get the putter rolling. We know with Bobby Mack it's either a good putting week or a bad putting week, although you did not see his name pop up on any of the stats that we did this week. I do think course fit wise, based on the tournaments that he tends to play and excels at, this could be a really nice course for the big bad Scott. All right, smash the like, sub to the channel, leave those audio reviews if you want to get into the draw for the free entry into the One and Done, but just play in the One and Done for the love of God. FantasyGolfChampionships.com, all the information you need for that, the newsletter, all of the signups is down in the description right now. I will see you next time.
Mayo Experience! Experience!